Then Abraham said, "Look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir." And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir." Then he brought him outside and said, "Look now towards heaven, and count the stars if you are able to number them." And he said to him, "So shall be your descendants." And he believed the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. Any thoughts, Dan?
Only a couple. Like, for instance, Abraham believed him right up until he didn't.
Right.
And I like how people always use these stories as proof that if God were to give, say, me or anyone else wealth, prosperity, whatever, we too would still doubt him. Kind of like how Adam and Eve messed up, but anyone in their shoes would have done similarly, except I don't think anyone would have. It's like, oh, you want God to bless you? Well, this one guy was blessed and didn't appreciate it very much, so obviously that will happen to you as well.
Yeah, I, I do see what you're saying. Abraham seems to be, we'll say, not a great role model
Right?
for the father of all of the nations of the world to be blessed by. Right? It just seems like almost like, are you sure about that, God? He doesn't seem to be fully on board.
No.
Yet here we are.
Here we are.
And how many faiths are now birthed from the Abrahamic line?
I'm going to say 3.
Yeah, 3 major ones that we know of. Yeah. It is interesting as well that...
to be fair, they could have picked anybody.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not like Abraham was a special person, you know?
Right.
I'm just saying.
Well, I'm trying to think if there are better... So, are there better examples than Abraham? And the interesting thing is we've got people like Enoch, right? And Elijah.
Yeah.
They were so beloved by God that they were assumed into heaven. Why not pick them to start the royal, holy lineage for all of eternity to bless all mankind?
I'm sure it's something to do with, imperfections, whatever.
Yeah. God using the imperfect to accomplish his will.
I guess if you're perfect, you probably aren't going to need God as much. Right?
Perhaps. I do think, though, if we look at Abraham as a person, he does kind of reflect ourselves more than some of the other characters in the Bible. And so it does become sort of a endearing figure because you can see yourself in Abraham making the same mistakes.
Except I can't.
Oh, well, you can't see yourself sleeping with your wife's maidservant?
Shockingly, no.
Right?
Yeah.
But if it was built into the culture, if it was an acceptable practice.
People always just blame the culture at the time,
Right.
Like for slavery, it was acceptable at the time, or racism, it was acceptable at the time.
Yeah.
Know? But some things just are never acceptable.
Right.
If you ask me.
Right.
And this is.
What do you think in our time is going to be completely unacceptable 200 years from now?
Well, I mean, racism, we're trying to get rid of it, but it's still everywhere, of course.
Well, I think humanity as a whole recognizes that racism is bad, even though we haven't eradicated it. I'm saying, what cultural practices are generally accepted as okay today that possibly 200 years from now, they're going to think, look at those, terrible, heathens that were still doing X, Y, and Z.
Well, I don't know, treating women, I don't know. We've been doing all right with the women, right?
I mean, we're doing better.
I'm saying there's definitely room to improve, and I presume in 200 years, it'll be a lot different,
Yeah.
I hope, hopefully there will be actual, genuine equality,
Right.
But right now, I think we still have quite a lot of room to improve.
Yeah. Is it possible to know today what will be immoral tomorrow?
Listen, I appreciate what you're trying to say, but I feel like yes.
Okay.
Because you should just know innately the difference between right and wrong.
Interesting. But so many people don't.
Yeah, well, it's not my fault.
Right.
If I were Adam, I would not have eaten the fruit. That's all I'm saying.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I think that's an obvious thing not to do since God created the universe, kind of told you not to.
Right.
Then again, he didn't have any knowledge.
All right. How about with that, with Abraham? You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, we've already shown that God does a lot of stuff for Abraham. They have a relationship. Everything's going well.
Mm-hmm.
And God says, "Hey, I'll give you a child." He's like, "That's great." Then a few years later, he's like, "You know what? I better have sex with my wife's whatever."
Yeah, that's a good point. And, we haven't got there yet. We're going to get there.
Yeah.
But I would preface it with this. The time span between the promise of Abraham and actually having the offspring was, roughly 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Think in your own life, say you have a religious experience where you feel like God has promised you a thing, and then 15 years later, you don't have that thing.
Okay, let me ask you a question. What was the lifespan back then for Abraham?
Well, we can find out right now. You would think that two great Bible scholars would know the answer to Abraham's age at death.
Uh-huh.
But I don't recall. So we're going to Google it. And according
175.
according to the internet, he was 175. You find that to be dubious or?
I mean, obviously it's dubious, but we're taking this at face value, right?
Yeah, we are.
So I'm just saying,
So I guess 15 years to Abraham is roughly equivalent to 8 years for us.
and you're saying we couldn't wait. I mean, here's the thing. We're saying this as if this was the first thing God promised him,
True.
but they've all apparently had quite a relationship,
The text would make it appear, that God has a relationship with Abram at this point.
Yeah, so,
But we don't know how often,
right.
these encounters are happening. Maybe years and years apart. It's hard to say. And when you have great spans of time in between events, the mind starts to work on itself. You start to think, well, did that really happen? Did God really promise it the way that I thought he did? Or did I misunderstand the promise?
I don't know. All I know is if God were talking to me, I probably wouldn't mess it up.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of those things that's easier said than done.
I don't think so.